Today, in this impromptu message, I wanted to talk about just that, time, the sense of time. Oftentimes, we anticipate things happening for us in our lives, and we're oftentimes told to be patient and to wait. And that's the last thing that you want, is to wait. Patience, another way of saying delayed gratification, which is how we actually see it. Whether it is a problem, whether it's a relief that you're seeking, or whether it's something good, you don't want to wait. But there are occasions where we are given snippets of something to come. Snippets of something that we would like, something that we would prefer, of an atmosphere and an environment that would be pleasing for us. Oftentimes growing up, for those of us that have come out of mainstream religion, for those that have kept Christmas, for those that have family members that still continue to do so, and even at work and as you go through the stores, you see that occasion where people, they get riled up for the holidays, they place all their presents under the tree, and they'll have that one occasion where it's like, all right, you can take that present early. But it's only for that moment. It is not the full gratification of what they would be seeking. But nonetheless, that stands as an example of getting something just a little bit early before the main course comes. That's not necessarily typical. The punchline does not come before the joke. There is an order to things, but sometimes when you are given something early, when you are given that snippet, it is with a purpose. An example of this, we could find in John chapter 2. John chapter 2, and we find Christ out with his family, with his mother. They're at a wedding. At this point in time, he had a couple of disciples already on payroll, if you will. And they're here enjoying the festivities of a family wedding. John chapter 2, verse 1. And the third day there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. And when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. Jesus said unto her, Woman, what have I to do with thee? Meaning, how's that my problem? Christ's mother came to him with a situation that had arisen, which would be a really big deal. Essentially, it was Thanksgiving, and somebody dropped a turkey. What was necessary for this event was not there. So things were probably going to go all out of whack. Money may have been invested. A lot of guests had come, and they were in a bind. There's no doubt Christ's mother, having lived with him and raised him, was privy to certain things about his abilities, about his connections with God, and was probably exposed to some things in that time. So she knew that he had a certain skill set. His brothers and sisters may not have believed him to be a Messiah-like political figure, but there's no doubt there was something extra to him. And so his mother comes to him and is like, listen, I need you to do, that thing you do, whatever you do. His response was, one, how is that my problem? And two, it's not time yet. It's too early. This is not according to the plan. Continuing on in verse 4, mine hour is not yet come. There is a certain time that things must follow. And in Christ's version of things, the timeline that he was on, it wasn't time for him to start publicly doing miracles, to start publicly trying to attempt to draw people in to the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. And yet here his mother is beckoning him to make some arrangements. His mother said unto the servants, whatever he says unto you, you do it, full aware of how things would work, knowing that the public is not aware of what he's able to do, but she just relayed to them, just do whatever he says. Continuing on in verse 5, verse 6 rather. And there were set there 6 water pots of stone, after the manner of the purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. In other words, the wine was set up in such a way, and the skins and where it was held. Continuing on in verse 7, Jesus said unto them, fill the water pots with water. And they filled them up to the brim. And he said unto them, draw out now, and bear unto the governor of the feast. And they bare it. In other words, they poured out the wine. And when they did so, in verse 9, when the ruler of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and knew not whence it was, didn't know where it came from, Christ had kind of razzmatazed up the water so that it was now wine. But the servants which drew the water knew. The servants were aware of what had happened, but the rest of the group, the party, was not aware. The governor of the feast called the bridegroom, and he said unto him, every man at the beginning does set forth good wine, and when men have drunk well, then that which is worth. I'm reading from the Old King James. In other words, the head of the party calls the bridegroom, and he tells him that wine was off the chain. But normally, that type of wine comes out last, not first. Why in the world would you put your best stuff out first? That was not typical in that day when they had events.
Yes, sure.
Again, another example where things don't follow on to plan, where you get a snippet of what's to come with a purpose. Just a taste, but early. Matthew 11. Matthew 11 and verse 3. Here we have an example where Christ is speaking to a crowd, and as he's speaking, the disciples of John the Baptist come, and they express a message from John the Baptist, where John the Baptist may have had some doubts. These doubts were not specific to Christ himself. These doubts were more so to a greater picture. Keep in mind, John the Baptist is now angel, and he perhaps was not expecting this. He also was expecting Christ to be behaving a little bit differently than he was. He was expecting a military ruler to begin to galvanize the people. Christ was not doing that. And instead, he's doing miracles and healing people. This was not what John the Baptist was expecting. But there's no doubt, John the Baptist and many of those in that day and time were aware that the kingdom to come was to bring about healing, was to bring about a change in nature, a change in the way man thinks, a change in the way one's body functions, and everything pertaining to life.
Yes, sir.
However, John was not anticipating that taking place in his day and time, but more so in the future, after this political kingdom became a reality, after the Messiah-like figure was to overthrow Rome, and Israel was now the dominant political force. Then all of these things were expected to happen, but not before. So this was John's question. Are you the one, or shall we look for another, is what is being expressed, chapter 11 of verse 4. That does not necessarily mean, even though some try to lean that way, that John the Baptist was doubting Christ in general. At that day and time, there were other figures that people were looking to have arrive on the scene. The Messiah was one figure. The prophet was another figure that Moses spoke of, where he told the people, a prophet will come among you and do as he says. So people were looking for the Messiah, they were looking for the prophet, and then, of course, they were looking for Elijah, someone that would come in the same role that Elijah had. So this was kind of where John was going. Are you the one, meaning, are you the Messiah? Or maybe you are the prophet, or maybe you're Elijah, and there's someone else I'm supposed to look for that's going to fulfill some of these roles that I'm looking to see take place. All of that just to make the point of what I'm trying to say. In the future, they understood that the kingdom was going to bring about a regeneration. Yet, nonetheless, what you found taking place, what Christ wound up answering, or the message that he wound up sending back to John, is taking place in verse 5. Chapter 11 and verse 5. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk. The lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them.
Yes, sure.
What you see here is something happening early. It wasn't meant to happen in this full context until way later. And yet here we are 2,000 years and it still hasn't happened.
That's right.
And what they saw was the trailer to the movie.
Yes.
And these snippets, this trailer, this early revelation was meant to signify the importance of what is to follow and what God was doing. 1 John chapter 3. 1 John chapter 3, and I'll start in verse 2. Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it does not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him.
Yes.
For we shall see him as he is.
Amen.
At this day and time, we have not come into what we're supposed to be. But we will show signs, flashes of what we're going to eventually become in our personalities, in the way that we think, and it battles with the other nature that we presently have. And it is through prayer, study, and endurance, and applying all these things that we are learning, that this transition begins to take place.
Yes, sir.
Now, a lot of times you may feel that things are not happening quick enough. I'm not seeing this transformation the way I would like. For those of you that live with someone, you could finish praying, and the next thing you know, you're getting in a fight with your wife.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting in a fight with your husband. You wind up getting into it and yelling at your kids. It is a gradual transition where eventually this godlike nature will overcome the nature that we presently have, and that's our challenge. That final transition won't take place for yet some time yet. It is the process that we're going through now that is most important, and as I said, you will see signs early of what we are to become in our character and in the way that we think. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, that whole chapter speaks on there's a time for certain things, which there is. There's always a time for this and there's a time for that. We're accustomed to that. Here in the States in April, it's time to pay your taxes.
Yes.
And if you don't pay, you're going to have other problems. There's a time to answer for these things. I made a comment to Mark today. He sent out a text that I noticed when I woke up. And my response was, what were you doing up? to text, that's just, not that it would have bothered me, there's a time where you think people are asleep. I thought he would have been asleep too. But nevertheless, he started early. And this is what God is doing with us, giving us little snippets of things to come, to induce us to pursue what we are leaning to and what we are chasing. In 1 John chapter 3, verse 2, I concluded with that. All right. So, with that being said, it's important to recognize that the little signs that we do see in ourselves are going to transition into something else. As earlier today, before I came up, young man Horace, he was speaking to me, and I was getting way more conversation than I had been accustomed to in the past. Because now, he's more formidable with his words. This was not the case several years ago. He's getting older. And as he gets older and he begins to change, he will resemble his parents more and more in their physical features, in their other attributes, in their temperament, and the things that, just the intonation of the voice. Sometimes you call someone's house and the child picks up. You think you're talking to the father or to the mother. Because of that voice, it changed. And it resembled the adult. And then you realize, oh, that's not who I was speaking to. But in fact, you were. You were speaking to who you thought you were speaking to. Same person, same family. As with us, we are changing into God the Father and to Christ, same family, we will eventually have the same voice and eventually have the same parents.
Yes, sir.
So, those little signs that we get, they may be early, but they tell us of what is to come, and early is good.
Amen.
As with the sermonette, so in reality, as the speaker and the sermon speaker will come up earlier than anticipated, because I've concluded with everything that I needed to share.